right, what's happening, folks? Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Adventure One podcast. So thank you for tuning in, and first of all, I want to start with an apology. It has been quite a while since my last podcast. I think it was way back when Daniel and I were doing a kind of last-minute, last day of season deer hunting adventure in West Texas, and we got a bunch of snow and crazy weather, and that was a fun story, but man, that was quite a while ago, well over a month ago. So I apologize about the delay. I want to be a little bit more regular with this. I know it kind of comes in spurts during deer season. It was almost like I would go hunting every weekend and then tell the hunting story the next week. And I think that's a little closer to what I want to do. Now, I've always been intentional about not wanting to have a set schedule for this, just because I think sometimes people will do that and then it forces them to create episodes that aren't great. It forces people to just cater to a schedule and just want to put stuff out instead of telling stories that are really worth telling. So I always want to kind of tell a story generally quickly after an adventure or related to just a topic. Maybe that's something related to a precision rifle build or to a specific hunting strategy or just kind of general information related to a certain topic. I always want to focus on either telling a story or talking about a topic rather than pumping out content to meet a schedule. But that's no excuse for having a really, really lazy, laid-back schedule. But what I do think is kind of an excuse is, man, I've been going through a lot of stuff, including a very significant career change. So for people who know me personally, I did work in the hunting industry, and that was always a difficult thing because I didn't want that to totally pollute Adventure One and this podcast and everything I did on my own. But I also didn't want Adventure One to ever get in the way of what I was doing vocationally. So it was always difficult for people who know where I worked. Sometimes I would bring up the products on here, but I wanted to make sure that it was never a sponsorship. This is totally my own project, not owned by my employer whatsoever, nothing like that. So it was always a little bit difficult. And it was a great company, but the owners did not hunt or fish, so I still had to take all my own PTO time, even though I worked in the industry and I was often doing photography and things like that. For this brand, I still had to take all my own very limited PTO time, and sometimes it would even be canceled on me when projects came up in order to get out and hunt and do anything like this. So I think going forward, my situation will be just a lot more normal in terms of I can request time off. There's no special treatment for hunting, fishing, anything like that. But honestly, I didn't really get that before. So I think my situation will be a little bit normal. But during this process, figuring that out, there was a lot of difficulty. And I just didn't really have any spare time to be doing much hunting. And actually, timing-wise, worked out well because there's not really a lot in season when all this was happening. So it was a difficult transition, but through that, I basically put in my 2 weeks, and then they said, nope, you can go ahead and get out of here. So I met them halfway, worked a couple more days, and then kind of it was mandated that I took my vacation time. So I went ahead and took that, and it was actually a nice break because I get started with my new position on Monday. Maybe I'll talk about that later if it's appropriate, but again, my vocation has not really been a part of this podcast. But what is important is between starting my new job on this upcoming Monday and wrapping up my old position, it forced me to have a little bit of a vacation that I had not had in a long time. So many of my hunts have been capitalizing on 3-day weekends or just kind of doing the weekend warrior thing, then coming back and trying to regroup and edit videos and record a podcast at night. This forced me to have a little bit of a retreat to go out and do a little bit of soul searching, do a little bit of relaxing, and just get out here and enjoy it and say, you know what? I'm going to take pictures and take videos and shoot my guns and do everything just kind of for me, not for my job, not to meet a certain schedule. And having that kind of scheduled relaxation, I guess, because in a way it is scheduled. I intentionally blocked off the time to do this, but I didn't overly schedule what I was going to do here other than a rough to-do list of here are some cool things that I'd kind of like to accomplish. And so that's what I've been doing, and it's been great. So as I've mentioned before, I have a lease down in Southwest Texas, and this year I was really torn on whether I was going to continue that lease or not. It's just so far. That's the biggest thing. It's 6.5 hours to get down here. That's hard for anybody to do, much less when I was so busy with work. It just made things really difficult. But every time I come down here, I find myself procrastinating to get packed up, and then packing up always takes longer than I thought. And then I hit traffic in Fort Worth, Texas, and I'm swearing and hating traffic and hating all the road time. But then when I get down here, I almost always think, man, it's worth it. This is just a cool place out in Southwest Texas, kind of the side of the limestone hill country where you have all these rough hills, cedars, mesquites. It's just rough country that I can't get up in North Texas. So even if I found some place close, yeah, there is probably a place that I could find that had good deer on it, likely better deer than here. But as you get closer to the big city, obviously the prices go up, the places get smaller, and it's just different terrain. So it's a struggle to get down here, but every time I'm out here, I enjoy it. So I was excited to come out here and actually try to really make the most of it. And one of the things that prompted me to come down here rather than to go to a local lake or somewhere else is South Zone turkey season actually started this last weekend. So in Texas, there are 2 zones. Most of the state is in the North Zone. And then I think it's anywhere south of Highway 10, maybe, is in the South Zone. So my lease is just barely in the South Zone. So there's an excuse to come down here and start going after the turkeys. Now, I've never killed a turkey on this property, and I don't really know how to hunt it, to be honest, because so much of my turkey hunting strategy is very similar to how a lot of people in really the Midwest or in the East hunt them. You figure out where they're roosting and where they're feeding. And then from there, you look at good spots where they may be strutting, good spots where they may fly down. You try to intercept them in the middle. And once you figure out where they're feeding, where they're roosting, you can work those patterns really well. But down here, there are no tall roosting trees. It's just scrub live oaks and cedars and an occasional mesquite. And there are no ag fields, no green fields where they're feeding. So the turkeys really can kind of roost anywhere in one of these scraggly little live oak trees, and then they just get down and they just wander around picking at broomweed and bugs and ticks and eating anything they can, really. And so that makes them incredibly hard to pattern down here. And I'm sure there are definitely some people who are very wise to hunting turkeys in South Texas and who know how to do this and have it all figured out. I think if there was a creek going through this property, that would be kind of my home run strategy, is a lot of times find water because you find those big roosting trees as well, and turkeys like roosting kind of with their backs to the water where they have a line of sight and nothing can sneak up on them, and also where the tallest trees are. But there's none of that here. So my turkey hunt, I did not get down here for opening day. It was a couple days later, but I got out well before sunrise, got all my stuff set up. Oh, and one thing I want to bring up before I get into the hunt itself is coming down here, I realized I left my decoys at home. And I was kind of about 30 minutes into my drive, and I was just thinking, oh, crap. Do I turn back home, add another hour to my drive to go get these decoys? I don't know. And so I popped into a Bass Pro Shops on the way and got a new set of decoys that I think was about the same price as what I had. It was $100 for a hen that was kind of in a laid down breeding position, and then a half strut Jake. But what I thought was cool about this is it actually came with a fake fan that I can replace with a Jake fan that I have at home. So it came with a fake fan, and it actually came with a robotic stick. I don't really know how to describe it other than that. That comes with a remote, and so you hit the remote, and then it will slowly turn the decoy around. So you can actually give it some life, make it move a little bit. Now, it's not like a full animatronic Jurassic Park creation that does all kinds of crazy stuff. It just slowly turns and moves it, and I think it's just enough movement to create kind of a little bit of a lifelike motion. So I decided, hey, you know what? These are definitely better than what I've got, so I'm going to go ahead and get these, and then I'll probably pass my current decoys down the line to somebody who's looking to get into turkey hunting and just needs some decoys, or I'll sell them for cheap or something like that. But I was excited to get these new ones. Now I'm just hoping to put them to use. So I got down here, got out, got all my gear ready, filmed a little intro, all well before sunrise, and then just started hiking, did an owl call, didn't successfully locate anything. And for those of you who don't know, a lot of times you can use an owl or a crow or a coyote sound to just make a loud noise and force turkeys to gobble back at you. It's called shock gobbling. I think they're just so fired up this time of the year that whenever they hear something loud, they'll gobble in response. So a lot of times, if you use a sound that's not a turkey sound, because if you use a turkey sound, they're potentially going to start coming to that sound. But if you use some other sound, you can find them and use that to kind of hone in on where they are. So I did not successfully locate any birds with that. And then as the sun came up a little bit more, I went ahead and switched to doing a hen yelp. And I did get a gobble in response, but man, it was a long way off. So I just started hiking and hiking and hiking, and then I never heard it again. And I didn't really know how to hunt this place other than, get that early morning tree gobble, then get close to them, then get set up and have them work into you the rest of the way. So without that, I just started wandering around, because the only other thing I know really in terms of hunting in rough terrain like this is just put a lot of miles on the boots, and hopefully you can just stop every 200-300 yards, call, wait for a minute or so, see if you hear anything, and then just keep moving. And then eventually, if you do that long enough, you'll hear a gobble and you'll locate one and you'll be able to move in on him. So that was my strategy. Tried that for a while, but did not successfully locate anything. At one point, I heard something moving in the brush, and so I got ready, started sneaking up on it, and it was a bunch of hogs, and they all took off running through the cedars. And anytime I'm turkey hunting or anytime I'm hunting with a shotgun down here in Texas, I always keep some number 4 buck in my pocket. And the reason I use number 4 is double-aught buck obviously hits way harder. It's what the military uses. Double-aught buck is extremely powerful, but it does not pattern well through a choke. It's designed for a cylinder bore or at most an improved cylinder bore just to get it all down range, not to spread it out into a really tight clump. So when I have a turkey choke on my gun, running double-aught buck through a shotgun can actually damage the choke, swell the barrel, and at a minimum, it's just not going to pattern well. The pellets are going to be banging around against each other and flying every which way. But if you move down to a slightly smaller shot size, like number 4 buck, it will pattern well through a tight turkey choke. Yeah, it's not going to have quite the impact that double buck would, but you still look at the size of these pellets. There's 27 fairly large pellets in there. It's more than the equivalent of emptying a whole magazine of a 22 onto a hog. So it's more than enough for a medium-sized hog, within 50 yards or so. So when I heard a hog off in the brush, I tried to very carefully slide back the slide on my Mossberg, dump out that top turkey load, tossed in the number 4 buck, and then I kept going. And I saw him running off through the brush, and I was fiddling with my camera, and I just never really had a clear shot. I could have maybe lobbed something in the bush to try to force it to work, but it just wasn't clear enough. It wasn't going to be on video. It was kind of halfway a good shot, and so I just didn't want to force it, and I didn't want to blow out the whole area either. So I went ahead, took that round back out, put in my turkey load, and kept going. I walked around for a long time, and it was a beautiful hike. Great to see all this kind of southwest rugged country, but did not locate another turkey. So after I had been hiking for a little while, there's one water source on this property. Now, there are, puddles that fill up from spring rains and little drainages like that, but there's one consistent pond. And so I'd walked over there, and then I just kind of sat down and took a break and just kind of relaxed by the pond. And I found myself just staring into the water for a long time. And I think that's something that's really special about hunting, but it's something that hunters can also share with hikers and backpackers and other adventurers. Just the idea of getting out there and just kind of having this meditative moment, just staring into some clear water, enjoying the sunshine, and just not having to work or think about anything particular. I realized how much just kind of sitting on the dam of that pond, staring into the water, it's important to have these relaxing moments when you're getting out in the field, especially for people who find themselves in the position that I often do, where, you feel a little bit pressured to create content, or you just want to cram in so many things in such a short amount of time that you get stressed out and you don't really take the time to think and meditate and ponder and pray and all that. And so sitting by that pond really reminded me of that. So that was a good 30 minutes of just sitting there doing nothing that I really appreciated. So after that, I kind of walked back to the road and then kind of began my long hike back. It was probably from there, probably a mile and a half back to my truck. Now, I probably walked a total of 6 or so miles that morning, just because when I was scouting for turkeys, I would wander up a ridge, then wander down in the valley, and then up the next one. And I wanted to cover as much ground as possible. And so then when I was ready to head home, or head back to the truck, really, I just kind of took the straightest route back. And so that was probably about a mile and a half back. So after that, I hiked over to the area where I have kind of my stands and my feeders set up, and I needed to kind of top things off and do some repairs and some work over there. Now, I think it's really important, at least down here in this really rugged country and where it's legal, to feed year-round. Now, there are people who talk about states that are bait states and no bait states, but I think it's a lot more than just baiting to attract animals. That may be what it is when you're going to a place for a couple days and you throw some corn on the ground. Yeah, you're using it as bait. You're trying to bring in those animals. But here, where the country is so rough, it actually is supplemental nutrition. It actually helps these animals put on a few more pounds, stay healthy, have a reliable food source. Because out here, there's enough to survive, but they're scrounging for a living. So if I can just have a consistent food source that's not going to be enough for these animals to live on, but just provides them with 5% more calories throughout the entire year, I think that's important to do. So all that to say, I'm a believer in feeding year-round where it's appropriate and where it's legal. Now, I don't keep the protein going all year round. I keep the corn feeder all year round, and then in the spring and summer, I feed protein because that's when the bucks are growing out their antlers, that's when the does are giving birth, and when they're nursing, when they need those extra calories, when they need the extra energy. When you give them extra protein and extra calories in the off season, it's just going to make your deer herd that much better. All that to say, that was important. I needed to go out down here and top stuff off. And I had gotten a picture from my Spy Point camera of a cow laying in my pen around my feeders on top of a huge pile of corn. And so I knew that they had somehow blown through the fence and gotten in there. And my feeder is big enough that they can't knock it over, but they will bump up against it because they've realized that every time they hit it hard, some corn falls out, and they'll just keep doing that. And so, of course, that wears things down. They're not going to send it flying or tear it up completely, but it's enough that they're going to gradually damage things and do whatever they can to get the corn out. So I had seen that picture, and I was pretty pissed about it when I saw just all this corn all over the ground and a cow literally laying in the pen that I was trying to keep them out of. So went down, filled up the feeder again. It was probably about half full, so I put a couple more bags of corn in there, and then put a little bit in the protein feeder. Now, it's interesting. I run a Boss Buck protein feeder, which is a great little feeder, but it's very important to use T-posts to put that thing deep in the ground because it's so lightweight, which is great for shipping and hauling it around, but it's very lightweight. And while the top kind of capsule part of it is very durable, the legs and the drop-down feeder attachment are not. So I always try to fill that thing up, but I don't fill it up completely because I don't have a ton of faith in that it's going to last that long. So I want to just provide enough feed just to barely make it or to run out by the time I get here again. So I'll put 2, maybe 3 bags of protein in it, which is about all it will take, and then be back down in another month to fill it up again. So got that topped up, and then I realized the cow had gotten in because they had blown through the barbed wire fencing. And so this is something that I think I even talked about this on a podcast, almost a year ago, about kind of just doing work on properties and building pens to keep cows out of feeders. And there are a lot of different thoughts, and some people try to keep just the cows out, cows and horses. Some people try to keep the hogs out. I realized kind of anything I did down here, the hogs were so relentless that they were just going to dig under it. They were going to tear it up. They were going to do whatever. And some of the best solutions I've seen that attempt to keep hogs out also mean you have a full, very thick mesh, which means, yeah, you could maybe shoot a rifle through it, but forget shooting an arrow through that. Whereas a barbed wire, you can generally shoot a rifle through it without a problem. Every once in a while, you'll clip a wire, but it's very rare. And generally, with an arrow, you're probably okay. So I didn't want to build any of those mesh fences, so I'd gone with barbed wire. Now, with barbed wire, all the strength really comes from your corner posts. You have really solid corners, H-frames or some other type of brace, where you can just get that firmly planted in the ground and run a high-tension wire between the corners and then just basically tie into all the T-posts in the middle. So when you're running a system like this, where I can't cement in solid corner posts, it's a circular pin, it gets a little tougher to keep the wire tight. And I realized there are a few places where the wire had gotten damaged from cows and sheep and other animals rubbing up against it, and it had actually broken in a couple places. And I think some of that was my fault because it had broken, and then I was trying just kind of an old redneck trick of, yeah, it's broken, so just grab the wire, kind of give it a little loop, flip it, and then twist it, and that'll tighten it up. Yeah, that's true, but every time you do that, you're damaging the wire and you're making a weak spot. So the next time an animal tests that and leans up against it, guess what? Pop, it breaks. So I had done that, and so I wanted to just kind of fix it up, and so I started working on it, and then I would get one section tight, and then by tightening one section, it would put slack in the next one. And I realized having the whole thing tight was going to be a crucial part of keeping these cows out of the pen. So I ended up just cutting the wire off of a large part of it and completely rerunning all 4 strands of wire around about half of the pen. And then in other places, I realized it was loose because I had gone too far. I had had too much of a span between my T-posts. So I tried to tighten that up a little bit by adding another T-post in the middle. I don't need to get into too much more detail. I feel like I've already talked about that way too much. But all that to say, I spent the whole afternoon all the way until dark kind of working on that pin, getting it shored up, getting everything set. And then when I was out there, I'd also bought some throw and grow kind of hidey hole food plot type mix. And a lot of those mixes I've realized are almost entirely ryegrass with just a little bit of clover and a little bit of oats thrown in. So this is one I paid a little bit more for. I don't even remember the brand. It was just one I bought at Tractor Supply. But I looked at it, and it was mostly wheat with some oats and some clover and very little ryegrass. So I was grateful for that because it's so hot down here. Ryegrass doesn't grow well anyway, and I don't think it offers a lot of nutritional value. I think the cows will eat it, but the deer don't really care much for it. And so that's not what I wanted to do. I did not want to just feed the cows more while doing little to the deer. So I threw all that out, and timing-wise, in terms of what it said on the back of the bag, it was the right time of year to throw all that out. I think it's kind of the last stand for winter wheat when you can get it to go. But I was a little bit worried because when it's super dry down here, the seeds aren't going to germinate. They're just going to sit on top of the soil, and the birds are just going to pick it off, or they're just going to get fried in the sun. It's kind of like that parable with the seeds thrown on the rocks. So I wasn't sure how that was going to take. Later on, I figured out it's probably going to work for me, but we'll get to that in a minute. So after I had thrown out that seed, filled my feeders, and worked on the fence, I kind of was just exhausted. So I went back to camp and kind of got out of my clothes that I was working in and then cooked dinner. So I grabbed a beer, and then I cooked up a pork loin, and it was actually from the hog I shot at another kind of permission place. So I think I did a podcast about this. I think I called it Dodo Boar or Dodo Pig or something like that, where I shot a doe in the morning. Kyle shot one that same morning. Then on my way back, I met him out at the place he was, and I got a pig right at the last minute. So it was actually that hog. So I cooked it up, and then down here, I tried something new. So at the property, they have a kind of combo unit that's a toaster oven and air fryer, which is totally bizarre to me. I don't have a toaster oven or an air fryer at home, so I didn't even know those things could be combined. But apparently they can. So I tried cooking the pork loin in that, and I think with pork, you always want to cook it very thoroughly. And I had a guy swear by this air fryer, saying that you can even throw steaks in there. And so I was like, It doesn't sound right to me, but I'll give it a chance. I'll try anything once. So I threw it in there, and it had a nice kind of sear on the outside of it. It was nice and toasty and crisp, but I think in order to get the pork all the way cooked through in that high temp air fryer, it just kind of got tough. So the flavor was good, but at that point I was so tired and exhausted. I just needed protein and needed calories. So I ate this huge chunk of pork loin, drank a beer, and then I was so tired. I was just sitting here kind of catching up with one of the other guys at the ranch, and then eventually I just got so tired that I'm like, man, I got to go to sleep. So I did, and then I actually forgot to set my alarm, and so the next morning slept in, did not get to go out and turkey hunt, so slept in real late. And then when I got up, man, I was so sore, but that's a good sign. That means I needed the work. My body needed to exercise. I'm building muscle. I'm using my joints, not just sitting here being just a fat slob. So kind of got going in the morning, got my coffee, got my granola bar, caught up with that guy a little bit. We did a little bit of work around the cabin, cleaning up, fixing some stuff. There's a water pump and some plumbing that are just always a problem. And that seems like any lease with a cabin, like there's always plumbing issues. I don't know why. Probably just because we redneck the crap out of it and never really do plumbing right, or we're in weird situations where we're trying to make a well water system work with a cheap home system. I don't know. There's always plumbing issues, so we worked on that a little bit. Then late morning, I went up to, there's a big cutaway where they put in a pipeline, and now it's just basically a long, cleared out gravel strip, and I've kind of used it as my shooting range. So I went out there because I wanted to just shoot my target rifle because I had not done that in a very long time. And then I also have an AR that I've kind of reconfigured a little bit. So this is a rifle that I owned the lower before, bought a new upper for it. Basically, I realized right now gun stuff is so crazy. I should probably do a whole nother podcast talking about that. Ammo is not, you can't find it anywhere, or when you do, you got to stand in a long line, and then there's a limit on 2 boxes. It's just crazy right now. And AR-15s, you couldn't find them anywhere. And I basically realized, well, I had my AR, and then I had enough parts that I could almost make another one. So I spent a long time looking for those parts, kind of took an existing lower I had, rebuilt a new upper for it, and then used the other parts on another project. But again, we can talk about kind of AR building and all that stuff in a whole nother podcast. But this was a lower I had rebuilt the upper, and I had kind of function tested it and just put a couple rounds through it just to break it in and make sure the scope was roughly on target, just bore-sighted, but I hadn't really zeroed it. And I'm a big fan, if you go back and listen to my kind of precision rifle build episode, I'm a big fan of first focal plane scopes and mill reticle scopes with mill adjustments. So that's what I put on here. It's the Nikon Black FX1000. I think it's the 4-16 by 50. They also make a 6-24. It's not that. So it really has all or most of the features that I want in a long-range precision scope. But being a Nikon, it's just a lot cheaper than some of the other stuff out there for tactical applications. And the tracking is nice. It has a lot of great things about it. The glass just isn't, it's not top tier, but it's good enough. So it was going to be fine for my AR that really, I was planning on it being a 500-yard gun anyway. So it would work great for that purpose. So I wanted to get that all set up, get my rifle doped out. So I went to the shooting range. And so, of course, while I was there, the first thing I did was go all the way back to the far target, set up with my 6.5 Creedmoor, and send it just to see if I could dial my max known target distance and be on target. And I realized I was way off. The bullet hit the dirt way low and way right of where it was supposed to be. And I realized, well, I haven't actually zeroed this gun in a long, long time, and I've been hiking around with it and throwing it in the truck many times. So somehow I probably banged my scope and it got off. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go all the way up to 100 yards, get a really good zero on both of these guns. So that's what I did. Got a great zero on both of them. Now with the 6.5, it's a bullet that I had already shot a lot. I already know exactly where it's going to hit. I know my drops out to 1,000. So once I got a really good zero, I knew I was right on with it. And then with my 223, I was starting from scratch. So it took me a little while to get a good zero. And then this scope actually has a zero stop in it, so I installed that. That's another feature that I didn't really appreciate when I was getting into long-range shooting and rifles and all this stuff, mostly because I was hunting with a 3 to 9 out to 150 yards, so you don't need a zero stop. Who cares if you're only shooting that far? You don't even need to dial anything. But the number one mistake that I've made, and I think a lot of people make, is once you spin the scope up multiple times, you bring it back to the first zero you see, not your true zero, but the zero marking on the scope. And so that means you can be a full turn off. So a zero stop is really helpful. So you can bring it all the way back down. So at your actual preset zero, the scope will stop moving. So you can't overturn it, and you're not risking underturning it by just looking at the zero mark. You actually feel the turret stop. So I installed that zero stop, and then I did what's called an archery walkback tuning. I don't really know if there's a term for it in long-range shooting. I think it's just kind of the go-to way a lot of people do it is you'll basically get set up at 100 yards, move back to 200. I use Straylock Pro to estimate my ballistics, and I found if you put really good data in there, if you're using your exact bullet, exact scope, you're measuring your scope height, you're putting in really good data, I'm usually within a click of the data that they provide, which is incredible, actually, for an app to be that close to reality. So it always gives me a firing solution that's worth trying. So I'll move back to 200, dial their solution, see where it hits, usually go up or down 1 or 2 clicks, figure out what it is, then shoot 1 or 2 more confirmation shots just to make sure I didn't get lucky or pull something. And then I'll go ahead and write down that dope. And then I did the same thing at 300, 400, 500, and 500 yards for a 223 semi-automatic. I thought I was really pushing it. I generally regard an AR-15 in 5.56 as a 300-yard weapon. That's kind of where the cartridge, before the wind starts taking it and before it just loses all power, that's kind of as far as you can realistically get before things just start getting a little squirrely on you. But I'm shooting heavier, longer bullets, so I'm shooting the Hornady 75 grain hollow point boat tail match bullets. And I think commercially those are available as individual projectiles because I have some of those, but they're also available. I think it may be an exclusive at Academy, or at least that's where it started, the Hornady Black 75 grain hollow point boat tail. So that's what I'm running, and that longer, heavier bullet definitely slows down the bullet, but allows it to fly very well with a high ballistic coefficient and helps you reach out to those longer ranges. Now, does it have more energy on target? No, not really. A little bit more than a 55 grain. But the primary purpose of this isn't necessarily to hit harder, it's just to give you more energy to get out there further. And so that's exactly what I was trying to do. So I got to 500, and I even got out to 600. And I was staying on my 12-inch plate at 600, but it was really starting to open up. I could consistently get 3 shots on the plate without really thinking about it or worrying about it too much. And so I realized, as the group is opening up here, 600 yards, so that would be 2 MOA on a 12-inch plate. But with a semi-automatic and wind and this bullet starting to slow down, I realized that's probably the maximum effective range because, I could hit something larger or I could tweak things a little bit more. But hitting a 12-inch blade at 600 yards with a 223 AR-15, that's a great accomplishment. So I'm happy with that. I don't necessarily need anything better than that. So I did that, got everything set up on that AR, checked the Creedmoor at all those distances, and man, I know there's so much hype around the 6.5 Creedmoor, and people spreading all kinds of, frankly, rumors about it, that it's an inherently accurate round. It's not. There are so many good rounds out there, but it's one I really like because Hornady and other manufacturers really realize people are building up 6.5 Creedmoor rifles for accuracy. And so everything around there is not trying to just build a cheap hunting rifle. A lot of these 6.5 Creedmoors, including mine, are just designed to be accurate target rifles. And it was refreshing when I was shooting the AR and I was getting decent groups with it, but then that bolt action 6.5, just center punching it every time, even at 600 yards, without even really thinking about it. A couple of years back, there was a shooting trend called the Gallon Challenge, or Gallon Challenge for you people from Michigan. It was started by long-range shooters of Utah, and the goal was to shoot a 1-gallon milk jug at 1,000 yards in 10 shots. And that's an impressive shot. And it's more doable than it ever has been with just these accurate long-range precision rifles and rounds like 6.5 and 300 PRC and just all the innovation that's happened there and that it's become more affordable. It's more doable than ever before, but it still is one heck of a challenge to hit a target, less than a foot across at 1,000 yards, a kilometer. And so I wanted to do a challenge similar, but put my own kind of Texas spin on it. So I got a can of Lone Star, and if you're not from Texas, Lone Star is just a cheap beer that you can find just about anywhere here. It's usually kind of one of the cheapest. It's okay. It's not great, but it's just kind of a Texas thing. So I set that out at 600 yards, and I was going to see if I could hit a can of Lone Star, just a beer can, at 600 yards with the 6.5 Creedmoor. And I actually was recording video for this whole thing. And so my goal was to get it in, for sure, a magazine, which is 10 rounds for me, but hopefully less. I didn't say it on the video, but I was hoping to get it in less than 5 yards. And believe it or not, I actually hit it on my first shot. I surprised myself. I knew I was going to I could hit a 12-inch plate at that range very easily, very consistently. So I knew I was going to get close. I knew I was going to scare it, but I didn't know that I was just going to center punch it and smoke it on my first shot. So I got a cool video of that. And actually, when it was on the ground, I shot at it again. I think I missed my second shot, but I smoked it my first one. So stay tuned to the YouTube channel because I'll be putting up that video pretty quick. I think I'm going to call it the Lone Star Challenge, shooting a beer can at 600 yards. So after all that, I had been sitting out in the sun for a while, just shooting, enjoying it. And again, this whole trip, this whole adventure was kind of on the idea of, hey, don't rush things. Get out here and just enjoy it. And so it was fun to just get out here and shoot, not necessarily with the goal of sighting in a new gun, even though I did that, but just to keep shooting, just to have fun and remind myself why I enjoy this stuff. So I had done that, and then it was starting to get really hot out here. So went back to camp for a late lunch, cooked up some deer burgers. So did that, just kind of relaxed for a little bit, watched TV. And it's so funny, like down here, there's satellite TV, but there's no internet, there's no phone signal, but there is a satellite so it can get TV, which is totally opposite of at home. I have internet, but I haven't had TV in a decade. So just kind of had a lazy lunch, watching TV and eating deer burgers. Then after that, kind of started slowly getting packed up again, getting my energy back. And I was going to go, I didn't think the turkeys were really going to be moving kind of in the hot, windy afternoon. But I was going to go just check on my feeder, see if anything was moving there, and then go back out to that pipeline area, maybe throw some corn on the ground or just glass the pipeline just to see if I could see anything. So I went out to check my feeder first because it goes off pretty early in the day. So I went out there, and sure enough, as I walked up, I saw a little pig. Now, he wasn't in the feed pen. He was just kind of hanging out outside, just kind of roaming around, digging around in the dirt, seeing if he could find anything. And when I walked up, I had, of course, my binos and rangefinder on me, which is always on me in that kind of Badlands bino pack that I always have that on any big game hunt. So I had that. I had my camera on my tripod. So I was trying to film them a little bit. And then I had that 223 that I had dialed in. Now, some people don't think 223 is adequate for hogs. And so that's why they get an AR-10. But if you have a good bullet and you know you're dope and you can make a good shot, you can absolutely kill a hog with a 223. I just suggest don't use an FMJ bullet. That'll poke a little hole in them. Eventually it'll kill the pig, but you'll never find it. Anyway, I had the 223 and was kind of getting ready to lay prone, flip out my bipod, and take a 200-yard shot on that hog. And then I realized he's just kind of casually meandering out there, and there's some bushes in between me and the pig. And, well, heck, I'm downwind of him anyway. We could do this with a bow. So I basically ran back to my truck, swapped out the 223 for my bow, grabbed the Hoyt, ran back, and he was still there. Now he was starting to kind of move the other way, and so I was trying to record a little intro with my camera. It didn't work out too well. I don't know. Maybe you'll see the video and you realize, yeah, that was kind of rushed and frantic, but it was enough to get the point across. And so I saw him kind of trotting along, and he went through the tree line, and I knew there was another clearing on the side of the tree line. So I basically ran to try to get around him and ahead of him to meet him on the other side. And as I snuck around, I saw him pop out from the tree line, and then he was just kind of rooting in the dirt. And I snuck up a little bit closer, and then he moved, then I moved, and it was kind of a little dance. And then it got to where he was actually standing there digging in the dirt. I ranged him at just under 40 yards. I think he was 38 yards. Dialed my apex sight. And so this is a switch that I've done that I hadn't really talked about. So all through season last year, I had a multi-pin sight on my bow, and I went back to a single pin this spring. And I don't necessarily think one's better than the other. They're just different. If you want something where you don't have to range it and you can make quick adjustments, and if an animal moves from 20 to 30, you just hold over on the next pin, definitely go multi-pin. But I like the precision of a single pin as well. So dialed my sight, aimed right on him, and let one fly. And I heard the thump of the broadhead, and he let out a squeal, and I knew it was a good hit. I had basically been aiming really tight to the shoulder and low. The vitals on a hog are a lot more forward and a lot lower than a lot of people think. If you hit them where you would think would be a high lung shot on a deer, you've missed the vitals a lot of times on a pig. So hit them forward and low, and I had done that. Turns out the shot actually was a little bit too low. I had barely grazed kind of the brisket, I guess, but it was enough that I got good blood. So I found good blood at first, and then it was just little drops here and there, and I kept tracking him, and he went pretty far, which surprised me because I thought it was basically a perfect heart shot, and so he shouldn't have gone more than 20, 30 yards. I saw the arrow, basically it went all the way to the fletching, so I always get an exit wound with the broadheads that I use. It's a titanium large game head, 2-blade, so it always punches through, and basically the veins had caught on the entry hole. And I realized the reason it had hung up was because it basically went through the brisket and then through the back leg. So it definitely did not hit the heart, but it was enough that it was still bleeding him out. So the pig ran probably about 150 or 200 yards, and just looking for little spots of blood in the dust and on these kind of white rocks. You can find it, but you just got to go slow, because I've lost a deer out here before. And the lesson I've learned is don't try to race ahead and find the next spot where the deer ran down the trail. You just got to get on your hands and knees and find one spot at a time and go really slow. And then I did that. Sure enough, found him, brought the hog back. And I think just because the shot was low, it just meant the pig ran further. But got him, threw him back in the truck, kind of closed out that video. And there was still a little bit of light in the day, so I called my buddy Daniel, and it's really interesting. Down here at the cabin and a lot of places where we hang out, there's no cell phone signal, but where I was right there, I actually had decent signal. So I called my buddy Daniel, because he had actually texted me and said, hey, we're out of pork. If you see a hog, shoot it. I want it. So I said, deal, I'll do it. I'll keep an eye out for one. So that's why I got really excited when I saw this little pig. So I called him and basically said, hey, do you want quarters? Or this is a really little one, probably about a 35-pound boar. We could just try to smoke the whole thing, just, season it, throw it on the grill, throw it on the smoker, and do it whole. And he was like, yeah, let's try it. So normally I don't gut pigs. I don't even skin them necessarily completely. I basically peel the skin back from the back, get the back straps out, and then get the quarters off and kind of leave it at that. But this one, since we were going to try to cook it whole, I kind of did the whole thing in the way that I guess some people are more familiar with. To me, I don't like it as much. It's nastier. It takes longer. But I skinned the whole thing, then gutted the whole thing, and it fit in my cooler. And it was cool enough outside that I wasn't super worried about the meat. I just didn't want flies or anything getting on it. And I wanted just to get the hot guts and skin off of it. So I rinsed it off with some cool water. I didn't have ice with me then, but the cool water definitely helped. Threw it in the cooler, and then it was starting to get dark. It was probably about 7:15 at that time, and It gets dark around 8 right now. So I went out, sat on the pipeline where I'd been shooting before, just to see if anything else ran across. Hopefully I could, now that I knew my dope, out at some long distances, hopefully I could fling a 6.5 bullet at something. And so obviously when I was doing this, I realized I was setting myself up for a longer shot. So I'd put the bow away, grabbed the rifle, kind of hiked out there and just sat and watched. And I saw 4 or 5 deer come out, kind of feed, eating some of the little sprouts that were springing up kind of on the pipeline. I think it's broom straw and a little bit of grass. That's kind of what they were eating. And then it was right at last light. I saw all the deer kind of spook off. And sure enough, at about 400 yards, I saw a pig just run across the pipeline. He didn't stop, didn't slow down, anything. It was just enough for me to grab my rifle, look at my dope chart, dial 400 yards, and then by that point, he was already gone. So I never really had a shot opportunity, but it was good to see something. So as I was hiking back, I looked up and there was a huge thunderhead forming over me. It's crazy in Texas. These things can pop up so quickly. It had been a clear sunny day and then, a few sporadic clouds through the afternoon. And then I just saw this towering thunderhead and I saw lightning actually inside of the thunderhead. It wasn't striking the ground, but it was just cloud to cloud. And I got a little video that I threw on Instagram, so you may want to check that out. It's The Adventure One on Instagram. If you want to see that video or just see any of my other photos from my other hunts or anything like that. So I got that video, started hiking back to my truck. Once I got back to the truck, there were a few rain sprinkles kind of starting to fall a little bit. I was hearing a lot more thunder, seeing a bit more lightning, but it wasn't really storming bad. And I realized, hey, I should probably go ahead and get back to the cabin because this looks like a serious storm coming in. It may go around us. Hopefully it'll miss. So hike back, threw some ice around that pig, cooked dinner, relaxed, was just hanging out a little bit, and then the storm really started coming in. There was heavy thunder, and then I heard just the unmistakable clanking sound of hail coming down on this metal roof. And I was just thinking, oh no, my truck's out there. There's probably people who are traveling who are stuck out on this. Hailstorms in Texas can be so destructive and so devastating. And so it was little pea-sized hail coming down quite frequently. I mean, it wasn't just hailstone every once in a while. It was almost like a full rainstorm with little pea-sized hail. And I was like, okay, that's not ideal, but things will be okay if it's just pea-sized hail. And then as I was standing out there watching it, I saw a bigger one about the size of a marble or a penny fall down. Then another one, and I realized, oh no, bigger hail's coming in. And so I grabbed my keys, ran out to my truck, and then behind the cabin, there's kind of this thick oak grove, and I kind of wedged my truck into this grove of live oaks just to kind of give it some cover. Now, with that, there's a trade-off that, a branch may now fall on my truck instead of a hailstone. But I realized, hey, if the hail is coming through these trees, it's at least going to slow it down and not bust windows and bang up my truck too bad. And I think doing that may have saved my truck because I did that. And as soon as I got back out there, I saw more and more kind of marble-sized hail and occasional golf ball-sized hailstones coming down hard in about 40-mile-an-hour winds. So they were hitting the ground really hard. So glad I did that. Maybe my truck would have been totally fine if I didn't, but I think it ended up being a good decision because I went out there and the truck was covered in leaves and twigs and the hailstorms would rip through the trees, but I think it was just enough to slow them down that it didn't break any of my windows or anything. And it's interesting. I think as I've gotten older, I'm actually more, not scared, but maybe it is a little bit of fear, but I'm definitely more worried about like thunderstorms and stuff than I ever have been. Growing up in North Texas as a kid, it was just part of life. They were here, no big deal. And just sometimes you get rained out, sometimes there's these crazy hailstorms, no big deal. But as I've seen just small towns get ravaged by tornadoes and people's vehicles get destroyed by hail and areas get flooded out, and I know how bad it can be. I think I'm just more worried about it, and there's just no part of me that can be at peace when all these crazy storms are coming in. So I found myself just praying, God, stop the hailstorms. I know this area needs rain, but stop the hail. It's so destructive. And it was really kind of getting me worried. And then eventually it did stop. Kept raining for most of the night. Rained and rained and rained. But was not the crazy storm that it was for about 2 hours. So after that, I realized, well, one danger of being in South Texas with all this rainstorms, well, Southwest Texas, not really deep South Texas, but the area is very prone to flash flooding because it's all hard limestone. It's not like farmland that can soak up all the water. It's either hard limestone that the water runs off, or the few places where it is kind of soft dirt. It's not fertile, ground with a lot of vegetation growing on it. It just turns into a mud pit. And so I realized, well, I'm pretty much stuck here and I'm going to need to wait for the place to dry out. So I said, well, I'm not going to get out turkey hunting in the morning, even though I really wanted to. I just realized if I tried to drive out, the ranch road here was going to be so muddy that I was either going to get stuck or it was not going to be good. So I just kind of slept in, got my coffee, got my breakfast, relaxed here for a little bit. And now it is sunny and windy outside, which is generally horrible conditions for hunting when it's a bluebird, crystal clear day, bright sun, and 20-mile-an-hour winds. Not the best for hunting turkeys, but actually I appreciate it down here because it's going to be drying out all those roads. Because I know, with my four-wheel drive, I could probably get out. But if I went hunting, and then came back to the cabin to pack up and everything, could I make 3 trips on those messed up boggy roads? That's a little bit risky. And even if I did, I was going to be tearing them up really bad for the next guy. So better to let stuff dry out, hang out here. And that's kind of what prompted me to record this podcast. I had brought everything down thinking, hey, if it's appropriate, I'll record a podcast. But I realized this isn't a thematic trip like a lot of the deer hunts or some of the backpacking adventures where here's one thing that we're going to focus on, we're going to talk about it. I wanted to just talk about, hey, here's the time that I could spend relaxing and all the crazy little adventures that have actually packed into a very short amount of time here, even when I wasn't trying to pack stuff in. When you get out and enjoy it, the stuff kind of happens. And so I wanted to just relax, set up the podcast stuff, and just have a little chat about all the stuff that reminded me why it's so fun to get out here and just adventure. So thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this. Maybe you're driving down the road to go to your own adventure, or maybe you're just sitting at home wishing there's something that you can do. But take time to just remind yourself why you enjoy it. Don't stress out about it. Just get out in the woods, get out in the country, look at a blue sky, stare into a pond, shoot your guns, shoot your bow, go have fun. Hopefully, I'll be able to put out another episode before too long, and it won't be a crazy wait like I did this last time. Until next time, stay safe, be free, and never stop seeking adventure.